was that the name of the bill's completely gone. But last time assisted dying was being discussed, I approached her by email, and I put my background down. I explained my personal situation. I explained, which I'll come to later on, about my father and what he'd lived through, and asked her would she support assisted dying, and she come back and said she was on the fence over it, and that she had mixed feelings, which I can understand, but with a strong Christian values and instructions from that. So I understood that. But what I picked up with her after that was she'd always been a champion of equal opportunities. And I remember when she first stood for Parliament, she had a huge billboard outside Lancaster railway station that had equality of opportunity for everybody. So I wrote back to her and I said, well, I do applaud you on this long life commitment you've had to equality of opportunity. And I'm fundamentally opposed to discrimination. And I gave a little bit more insight to the things I've been involved in, that I've experienced, and the campaigns I've been involved in over the years. And said to her that instead of thinking of assisted dying as life and death, I think you need to think about it as people suffering. But over and above the suffering, I think you need to think about it as an opportunity, because the very rich have always been able to take care of their end-of-life matters how they wanted to do, because they've got access to that type of thing. And even other privileged people, I include myself in that can muster together at least £10,000, you can go off to Switzerland, providing you've got the money and I'll come to that again later on, the social skills and the education to fill in the form and be able to get all the information together. So, however, that does leave the most socially and economically deprived in society with no option but to put up, shut up and suffer. And it was that inequality argument that actually won her over. She voted in favour of the bill, and she supported us ever since. Anyway, back to the important thing, me and my bio. I spent the first 11 years of my education, as you would expect from an Italian-Irish family, in a very strict Catholic school, which taught me everything I needed to know about Catholicism, but didn't equip me with the skills, the knowledge and the understanding to pass the 11 plus. So I failed that miserably, although you don't fail it, do you? Score lowly on it. And went to a secondary school that I managed to stay in till I think it was 2 days after my 14th birthday, when I was expelled as a troublemaker. And I've really worked out what a troublemaker is. It's someone that asks questions and challenges. I think that's, again, something that I brought from my education. It's no good telling me something. I want to know how and why, and could it be possible? Yeah. And I think that kind of innate skill I had, plus the fact I was expelled and I had to kind of get even with them, helps now with analysis and evaluation, certainly when we're looking at things like the opposing views of assisted dying. Because I was lucky, I suppose, at 14, my dad had a coal round in the winter and I had scream round in the summer, so I started working for him straight away and pocketing my money. I just saved up because he wouldn't let me off the leash, because I'd have probably turned out like he thought I would have turned out, but he put a block on that. And then, but at 16, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, your mums or your dads or people would put a few bob away in the co-op for you or something like that, and you'd get an endowment policy type of thing, and you get paid out. So at 16, I went to Lorette de Mar for 2 weeks, expensive, £39, bed, breakfast, lunch and evening meal, and I flew back from Goa in Germany 2 years later. So, and that was a great education. From there, I did a number of different manual jobs. Ended up on the buses when I was 20. I was always involved in the trade union movement, which is important because that's where I do a lot of campaigning now to try and get the law changed. And eventually, well, I think I was probably just 28, 29, well, mid-80s, so I'll be older than that. I was lucky enough to win a scholarship to Oxford University. And life went downhill from there onwards, quite frankly. I got into teaching. That was until 2015, when I was experiencing, I'd set up my own education consultancy by then, and I was experiencing a number of problems that I just couldn't quite put my finger on. I was losing whole periods of times. I hate paperwork. Like, I used to love preparing lessons, I used to love delivering, I used to love marking, I used to give feedback. But paperwork is just like, oh, that'll do again. And because of that, I was very strict. And I'd come down of a morning, and I was always in work, doing my emails, do the paperwork, etc. And things weren't working out. And I'd come down, have my breakfast, and the next thing, it was 5 o'clock. So there was things going a kind of bit strange there. And other things, I was giving feedback to people that I was working with, or trying to write articles still. And I was getting things back from people saying, we can't understand what you're writing. And then when I read it, I thought, well, no wonder they can't understand it, because I haven't got a clue what that says. So these problems kind of developed, and it got worse and worse. So I decided I'd go and see my GP, really nice man, Samuel Mood. And he said to me, what do you think it is? And I said, I've got doctor in front of my name because I wrote 120,000 words of absolute rubbish that's done out for anybody. You've got it in front of you because you've been in medical school. I hope you can tell me what's wrong with me. And basically, I said, I think a number of scenarios. I've been a vegan since I was 14, which can bring about memory lapse and things like that. I've got B12 deficiency, heart disease, gout. I'm on all kinds of different medications, etc. So it could have been any of them. So I've had a really turbulent 10 years. So it could be, anxiety, possibly even depression. I don't know. And of course, it could be some form of dementia. So he said, well, we'll get the I can't describe, but like the worst one out of the way, so to speak. Because he gave me the standard memory test, which I scored really badly on. So we'll send you to the memory clinic. So that's fine. Again, I'm fortunate. I mean, I don't believe that there should be a postcode lottery when it comes to national health and education, but I'm lucky enough to live in one of them postcodes where it's an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And maybe 3 days after that, I got a phone call from the memory clinic, and it was a male nurse, and he introduced himself, told me that he had the call, did the standard test with me again, which again I scored badly on. And he said, we'd like you to go for a scan a week on Thursday and come into the memory clinic the following Friday. So I said, okay, that's fine. I had the scan, and off I went to the memory clinic. Now, people say, what's it like being diagnosed with something like Alzheimer's? Because I think for people who know what it is, and they don't think it's just you forget who somebody is, or they realise it's a condition that is eventually going to kill you or something related to it. And I said it was nothing to do with that. It was the response of the psychiatrist. And I think this is worth us knowing, but the work that we're doing is, when I got to memory clinic, I took another memory assessment. You think I'd have remembered the answers by then, wouldn't you? But so much for rote learning, I haven't. I failed that miserably. And then I was asked to sit down and wait. So I waited for 20, 30 minutes. And then a young female nurse come out, took me to the consultant room and continued walking in. And there was somebody sat there in the room already, and the box of tissues. So you don't have to be Einstein to work out I've not won the lottery. So I sat down, and the doctor started umming and ahhing and did different things. And I've always been quite pragmatic. And I just said to him, okay, so is it dementia? And if so, what form is it? Well, I think I took him back somewhat. So he said, well, yes, it is. You've got Alzheimer's. I said, okay, fine. He said, what do you mean fine? I said, I've got Alzheimer's, it's fine. He said, is anybody with you? So I said, no. Well, why not? So I said, well, I live by myself. I wasn't told to bring anybody along with me. That would normally be, I was anaesthetic and I couldn't get on a bus or anything like that. So never crossed my mind. And I am by myself. So he said, well, what are you going to do? Well, this is where I made a bit of a mistake. So I said to him, well, I've been a supporter for a long, long time of humane voluntary assisted dying. So I already suffered greatly with gout, and I used to enjoy going walking on the moors, long distance walking cycle, and I can't do any of that now, and I suffer badly with it despite the medication. And I'd already made my mind up that once it got too severe, and I couldn't be independent, and the quality of my life was being impacted on, I would make an application. So all this has done is sharpen that up, and what I'll do is I'll give it a week or so, gather my thoughts, talk to family and friends, and then I'll make my application. Now, this is the bad part of it. This is the worst part of my diagnosis. He then said to me, well, I am now also diagnosing you as depressed. So I just looked at him, and I've got more sense than to tell a psychiatrist that I'm not depressed, because they'll be hitting that denial button quicker than somebody hitting the 3 cherries on a machine. So I said to him, well, that surprises me for a number of reasons. A, because of my social circle, I'm surprised some of my friends haven't picked up on that. And because of my own background, I'm surprised I've not picked up on it. I said, but I also am aware that you can be depressed, and you'd be the last one that would notice it. So I said, let's not argue over it. Let's proceed. So then he said to me, I want to put you on medication for both, but I can only put you on medication for one at a time, because of, did he call it counterindicators, whether you get the mixture between the two? They can both have bad side effects, and I wouldn't know which one it was. So I said, okay, fine. And then he said, so I want to treat you depression first. So I said, well, I don't agree with you. And he said, what do you mean you don't agree? I said, well, I don't agree with the way you want to treat it. I said, correct me when I say something wrong. I said, but my belief is that there are maybe 3 forms of medication that you can give to me that might, and I say might, slow down some of the symptoms or the side impacts of the dementia, and not the dementia itself. So he said, well, yeah, that's correct. I said, okay. So now, if I am depressed, I said, I've had an extremely turbulent 10 years or so. I said, I can understand that I could have developed some form of reactionary depression. Also, with the fact that I spent the last 2 or 3 months trying to figure out why I can't work, and that's enough to tilt somebody over. I said, now, my understanding is that form of depression there's alternatives to medication, like speaking therapies. And my preference would be for you to treat the Alzheimer's with the medication that may help me. And we'll go for talking therapies regards the depression you suspect I've had. And believe it or not, it wouldn't move. It wouldn't move on it initially. And I said, well, the outcome of this meeting is that I've got my diagnosis and I'm going to go away without treatment for anything. I said, but isn't there something in the patient's charter that you need to listen to what I'm talking about and what my wishes are and what my thoughts are? And he did it. Eventually he did it. And I said to him, just out of interest, the arguments I've just put forward, does that indicate a person that's suffering from depression to you? And he didn't answer it. And I also said, I rather suspect that the reason you feel I am depressed is because I've mentioned assisted dying, and you're translating that or interpreting that as somebody having dark thoughts, therefore at risk. Mm. And he actually said he did. And I said, yes, that's what I'm doing. I said, I think that's appalling that a man with not just your basic education, but the continuing professional development that you must have done, can't see the difference between somebody who wants an assisted death and somebody that's suicidal. So that really was the old diagnosis. And that for me was the most appalling part of it. And I can't tell you how shocked I was and how somebody might abuse their power in a situation like that. And I'm not going to label all psychiatrists like that, because Colin Brewer, a former retired psychiatrist, a good friend of mine, you know, Colin comes from the polar opposite to this fella. But it just shows the type of thing that's going on and the opposition that a lot of people would find. And I'm not convinced that everybody's got the ability or the experience to combat that type of thing. Anyway, the application, would it be of interest to talk about the application process? I think that's important in terms of safeguards. I came, after a few weeks, I'd notified people. I mean, the real difficult thing was phoning my mum up and saying, I've got dementia, because my dad was diagnosed with multiple systems atrophy And for the last 5 years of his life, he had atrophy-related dementia. And I suppose it's something about the chance of you dying before your parents. It's just kind of, it's not the social order that one expects, is it? So that was also difficult. But my mum's really strong Roman Catholic, and the first words out of her mouth was, "I'm very sorry to hear that, Alex. I assume you'll be doing the right thing and applying to Switzerland for an assisted death." So that's, and again, that's just to show that whilst not all doctors, you know, the way that doctor works, it doesn't. Doctors get slagged off. I understand that, which is incorrect because we shouldn't generalise. But people of faith also get hammered by people about being opposed. And I think what they need to understand is the leadership maybe, but not everybody. So the application, it's an amazing application process. I was already a member of LifeCircle, and I'd chosen LifeCircle over Dignitas because of the method. As I'm sure you're aware that Dignitas is the drinking barbiturates, which isn't a pleasant drink. And there's no certainty of time of death. I mean, Miriam will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it could be anything between 20 minutes and up to 10 hours for some people. I know a friend of mine, Sarah, she took her husband last year, I think a few years back, I think her husband took 4 hours into a deep sleep very quickly. I think it was 4 hours before he eventually died. And at LifeCircle, which I think is a much better practice, and it's one of the reasons why Erica Priestley, who's the president, left a job at Dignitas, is they have an intravenous method. So a drip set up, the drugs are put into the drip, and then I have to, there's a slide, and the person having it opens the slide, and the drugs are self-administered, which wouldn't make a nip of the difference if we go down the Canadian route, because the practitioner can inject the drugs in the Canadian model. So that's why I chose LifeCircle, because I thought, well, I don't fancy spending £7,000 on a drink that I don't like the taste of. I've always been a bit mean when it comes to spending money, so I thought I'll take the intravenous method. So like I said, I was already a member, so I'd already I paid my 50 Swiss francs every year for a number of years. And I just put this form together. And I think this is a good example to give. When people talk about everybody will be abused and killed, we'll be bumping all our grannies and aunties off and everything. I got all my medical records together. I put down my diagnosis and I said, I've experienced my dad with MSA, but the real bad thing for him was the dementia, and I don't want to experience that. I sent reports from the consultant psychiatrist. I sent them from my GP. I sent reports from the rheumatologist and the prognosis for, how that would develop, etc. And I actually thought that would be it. But I mean, what more evidence do you need? And much to my surprise, I got an email back of maybe a few days later saying, okay, that's fine, but now we need you to do a biography about yourself, about your life, and why you wanted an assisted death. And I thought it was quite strange at first, but it's not. When you start to write it, it's really difficult. It's like doing a PIP, to try and get a PIP award. You've got to write about how bad you are. But, when you're sitting down and of sound mind and loving life, writing down the reasons why you want to die, it's not the easiest thing to do, believe me. It's just kind of, so that had to go in. That went forward, and I thought, well, that should be the end of it. But then I had to get a psychiatric report. So I went for a psychiatric report, and that was to prove that I had capacity and that I wasn't under duress from anybody, etc., to pursue this. That was sent off to LifeCircle, and then just after that, I got the green light. Just before I go on to that, because I think the next part, I think that's important for safeguarding issues, because they should be very stringent safeguarding issues, and we've got to do our best to ensure that nobody can slip through it. That's something important. And I also think that safeguards is the last argument for us to win. That's why I think safeguards are important. In the past, when you think about the debate in 2015, there was three main arguments, really. One was that doctors don't approve of it. Well, we've seen that shift. despite what the BMA are trying to say at the minute. That's clearly the majority are in favour of neutrality or in favour of it. The Royal College of Physicians have changed. I think there's a growing support for it at least being permitted, if not supported, as we should change the law, so to speak. So that argument's gone out the window. The next argument was safeguarding issues. The third was God, but you're never going to win that argument. I won't even enter into that. I just say to people, you know something, I respect your right to have faith. All right, guys, I respect your right to choose to have that faith and practice it, providing you do no harm to others. Why wouldn't you respect my right to free will? That always gets them. But it's a safeguarding issue that I think we need to get out there. That's something we need to be arming ourselves up with and really thinking it through. And I think that's a good example of how it can happen. What I should also say is that, the psych assessment is now a known body. It doesn't mean a damn thing now. So when I choose my date, which I'm happy to say I keep changing, because I think it's important to have a date, and I'll talk to you about that later. But because the other thing that psychiatrists said to me is you've got 4 to 5 years to live, although you could live for another 11 years, but certainly after 4, 5 or 6 years, you won't have a clue who you are. So I thought, well, okay, it says something that I can relate to and appreciate. So I worked out so I was diagnosed 2015. So my initial date was working on that premise. I thought, well, I've got to be careful because I don't want to lose it rapidly and lose capacity because I won't be able to go. I chose, I think it was like 1718 and 1718, that came along. Then it was the end of, see, this is what I can't do, 1920. And now my proposed date is the end of 2021. But the beautiful thing about places like LifeCircle, despite what we read in the press, is they don't want you to go. I'm in regular contact with Erica. We exchange 2 or 3 emails every week. And, I keep her updates on reports that we're doing, a campaign that we're doing, anything like that. I always send a motto, and she said, just keep hold of your head. We don't want you over it. So you stay there and campaign. So they're flexible. They're very happy for you to change the date. And when I applied, because of the condition, I applied for an unspecified date anyway. So that's all great. But before I do go to Switzerland, no more than 10 weeks old, I've got to have another psychiatric assessment to state that I've got capacity. I have to be in Switzerland 2 days before the chosen time for my death. And that is for 2 lots of evaluations. So we see one doctor day 1, they sit down with you, they go through stuff, ask you why you want the assisted death, do you know why you're here, what's going on, sign certain forms, come back the next day. And even on the 3rd and final day, when you go into the centre, you can have a choose to sit on a chair or there's a bed you can lie on and everything's set up. You constantly ask, why here, what do you want to do, are you sure you want to go through this, why have you come, what are your reasons for it, etc. Which I think is great because it's constant check, 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 check. Now, this is going to sound really, really weird. I've actually spent time of a night time thinking about moving the slide. Because the most counterintuitive thing for a human being to do, if you're sound of mind, is to take your life. No matter how much you cajole, no matter what's going on, I don't think anybody's going to do that lightly. And it's, as soon as I switch that down, I'm going into a deep sleep. And you've got to really be convinced that that is far better than what you are facing, or in my case, what you're about to face, because that's another issue. There's that debate, should we be able to have it once we lose capacity? We stated it, but nowhere does that take place yet, so I keep that one on the back burner. So I think lots and lots of safeguards, and the other thing that I've got to mention is you have to send loads of paperwork off, passports, if anybody's going with you, their passports, the nature of the relationship to you, everything like that. And that all goes to the police in Switzerland. And each death is treated initially as a murder. So the police are involved prior to it taking place. Once they start to set you up with intravenous drip, a videos put on. You can see lots of deaths on Facebook and things like this, and that's not just because it's being videoed. I mean, I'm having mine filmed, but that's for future use and campaigning. So mine will be filmed separately from the Swiss thing, because I don't want it to be the end. You know, I just want to sort of, well, here's something. Campaigns go up in ebbs and flows, don't they? And if it's in a bit of an ebb at that time, then here's something to lift it up. And you better do something about it, because if I die in vain, I'll come back and haunt every single one of you. So that's all videoed. And then once that happens, the people who come with you aren't permitted to go to the airport before 6 hours after your death, because they could be arrested. And then the police come around once your body's. It's great, you know. People go on about how much is it costing now. So it's going to cost about 10 grand in total, but £7,250 of that is, if it's the right term to use, medical, not just medical fees. So I've got 3 lots of doctors. There's the doctor that's seeing me on day 1, the doctors that see me day 2, the doctor that prescribes, and then the staff involved in the centre. And property's not cheap in Switzerland by any stretch of the imagination. So it goes for all that. But it also includes my cremation, which, you know, when you work out £7,500 for the medical services and the cremation, it's a cheap do in England if you can get one for £7,500 these days. So I think I'm doing all right. It's a good deal. So the police come along and they check everything. They question people if they think, and as I said, nobody's allowed to leave until afterwards. Am I running on too long?
No.
Yeah. But the green light, I cannot. This is something. So that's all that linked into safeguards. So I think we've got a couple of things already that I've said tonight. Is we really do need to be promoting this argument of equality of opportunity. It's not about death. It's about stopping suffering. And our campaign isn't just simply about introducing the legislation. It's about ensuring that everybody has equal access, not as it's always been in this country, unfortunately, because you've got money. So that's the important thing. I think the safeguards on the Swiss model are really strict. And I've got to be honest, I've not got my head totally around the Canadian ones yet, but they're available for you to look up and read. So I think that's the things on that. The other thing that's vitally important, I think, is I love life. If I could go on till I was 200, as long as I could still get into lots of trouble and go to gigs, I'd be a happy bunny. You know, so it's not about I don't want to live long. I just want, I don't want an excessive quality of life. I just want to enjoy the quality of life. Quality of my life over the last 10 years has deteriorated through a number of things. Like I say, I've walked John O'Groats and I cycled it the year after. I've done 3,000-mile trail walks. So I've loved all that. Can't do that because of the gout. And I'm not particularly good at reading maps these days either, so that'd be a complete disaster. So the quality of my life has changed considerably, to my detriment, but I'm still able to do things that I can enjoy, like the campaigning, like still going to gigs, like still winding my sister up no ends. You know, there's like all kinds of lovely things in life that I can still do, and I appreciate it, so that's fine. But the quality of my life has improved. So in one state, it's on a downward slope, and there's not much you can do about that. But within that downward slope, there was a small peak, and that's when I got the green light. And I think this is what's important, is when I got the green light, it was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders, because I knew what my father had gone through. My father had become the very antithesis of what he previously was. It was a very physically fit man. It was extremely hard. And when I say that, I don't mean one of these nutcases that went in the pubs, you know, I mean, physically hard. He did lots of weight training. He was a young boxer. I ran a marathon with him when he was 60, and we did it in 3 hours, 20 minutes. Well, I couldn't breathe for about 3 days after that, and I couldn't walk for about a fortnight. When my breathing got down, I got a bit more control of my breathing. My dad is swearing like I've never heard him swear in my life before. I said, "What's up with you?" An hour 15 minutes to do that. I normally do it in 3 hours, 5. No, so that was the fitness of the man at 60. I was dying in my late 30s. And that's how fit he was. The MSA took a lot of that away, but he was fit. One of the things that always impresses me, I worked with him on the buses, and you know, there's canteen times where blokes are talking, and inevitably, with certain groups of blokes, it gets down to sex, you know, and this, that, and the other. And I was sat on this table, I thought, well, I'm not happy with this, I'm going to move. I wasn't happy with it anyway, because it's not the kind of thing I've ever kind of liked being involved in. And my dad's there as well, which made it doubly bad. So, but just before I could move, my dad stood up, and this is one of my proudest moments of my dad. And he turned around to these guys and he said, "You're absolutely appalling. You're disgusting." He said, "You shouldn't be talking about anybody like this. Certainly shouldn't be talking about women. If you're doing these things, you should keep that private." He said, "I've slept with one woman in my life, and that's his mum." And I thought, I thought, well, that took some courage. You know, that's so not male to say, and I was really proud of him at that time. He was always kind and caring, and even though he could handle himself, he was in trouble. He was never. I never got it off him. But, in fact, my mum was a demon, because when she used to whip me, and then the other occasion she'd say, "Wait till your father comes on." I think, "Oh, God's God, he won't hurt as much if he hits me," because he pulls his punches and she doesn't. So he was a really kind man, but he became rude, he became crude, he became violent, and he would have hated what he was. And he used to always say to me, "Help me, help me." Now, I'll try and say this without crying. The last thing he said to me is, pardon the language, "You useless bastard, you've let me down." I don't know what he meant, you know, and it's like 18 years old, and it's still... Okay, well, you can tell it really impacts. He didn't want to be like that, and I didn't want to be like that. You know, you shouldn't have to witness that kind of thing. And that's what I thought when I got the green light. I am not going to have to go through that. And what I always say to people is, it was a brilliant thing. We had a public meeting in, somewhere in the Southwest last year. Leanne spoke at it. And a doctor who was doing his PhD, we've been doing some work, he spoke and he said, "Well, I've heard that that kind of joy in your opium only lasts for a short amount of time." Being a former research supervisor, I said, "It depends on what question you ask, Paul." So, you know, "How did you feel?" And he's like, "Well, I'm over the moon, I felt really great." So probably, "Well, no, I don't feel the same any longer." But how did you feel when you got your new car? It's like this, but how do you feel about it now? I said, you know, you should have asked, what's the long-term impact been since you got the green light? And what I can clearly say, what I always say is, up until getting the green light, I would wake up, I would dream, and I would spend all day worried, not about dying, because that doesn't worry me at all. I don't think anybody's worried about dying. I think it's the way that you die. And I was worried about the way that I'd be suffering, the way I could become, and how I might treat people, you know, that I love and care for. So that was like a massive worry for me. But after the green light, I've spent every minute of my life thinking about how can I improve what I'm doing and what's next on the agenda. So even feeling down and stuff like that, I don't get that, you know, that kind of same feeling. I always kind of feel more positive, knowing, I think this is important, that I have now got control. I mean, on a daily basis, I don't have a partner. I always treat my Alzheimer's like a partner. And I work on the basis that partnerships are never equal. I don't care what anybody says. You've got a bad hair day, you start off bad. You're down in that relationship one way or the other. Someone will say something, not mean it the way we perceive that you're down in that relationship. So it's up and down, I was writing in relationships. And that's why I treat the Alzheimer's, because I'm still a hippie from the 60s. You know, I'm very happy with me and who I am. And I always work on the basis that I can't dislike it because it's disliking me. So sometimes the Alzheimer's has the upper, sometimes I have the other. And very rarely, like in a relationship, we have equilibrium. And we just muddle on. But I think it was very important that, you know, I made that point that it saved lives. If I hadn't, I'm opposed to suicide. I know how bad suicides can be. And I would always try to talk somebody out of committing suicide, because was it something like 85% of them fail and people end up in a worse position. I would have taken my father's life. If I thought, if someone had come along and said, get your dad to swallow that or push that needle in there and he'll die quickly and peacefully, I'd have done it and put my hands up. You know, I've been quite happy to put my hands up and gone to prison for it. But what I didn't want to do is make him worse than what he was, and that's why I didn't do it. But I'd already worked out the amount of heroin it would take, which is a dirty, horrible drug. And I'm very aware that it's not like you see on the films where you fall asleep. You know, there could be convulsions, there could be fits, there could be vomiting and everything. But I'd worked out how I could commit suicide and take my life before the dementia took control. So when I hear people like Care Not Killing saying, all you want to do is take lives, I say, actually, not only do I love life, not only do I value it, and that's why I want an assisted death. Assisted dying saved my life and the misery of people that would have to have dealt with that mess. And because it's in Switzerland I've got to go, so people like you who talk about faith, so I've got friends that have faith. They believe in the afterlife. I've got family that believe in the afterlife. So that's, you know, and I respect their view to have that. They're being denied what is said as a grieving process. The key part of the grieving process and the start of the healing is the funeral. And you're denying people that right to start their grieving because they can't have my funeral because they've got to go away to Switzerland for that. Just a bit about the campaign. Is that okay?
Yeah, and then probably a few questions I've got.
Yep.
Okay.
The campaigning, MDMD do some great work, sort of fate, and they're far better than I am talking to politicians because I'm such a cynic. And I have to be careful what I said to many politicians. And why do a job that someone's doing better than you? Now, I mean, when I set my group up, before I'd come across MDMD, I'd left Dignity in Dying because they refused to even talk about the possibility of changing the policy. I'd asked to put on the conference agenda and attend the conference, and I was sent an email by Zach saying, we will never change our position. So that was, oh, okay, not even democratic, I'm out. Fortunately, I'd come across the Right to Die in South Africa, which is associated to the World Federation, which MDMD are also members of. I was in a South African group, not the international one, and I decided to open the English one up. There was 40 odd people on it. And I just couldn't believe it. I've never worked out what went on, and I thought of all kinds of things. We set it up in the April, and then over the Christmas for a fortnight, my phone didn't stop pinging. And we had, over the Christmas period, we had 1,200 people join, which is unbelievable. And I wish I knew why. You know, I don't know, arguably it was a time of depression, but we don't talk about suicide. We don't allow talk about suicide. So it's not that kind of impact. And they've maintained membership. But I decided to take out what am I good at and what do I know. That's education and trade unions. And what I've been doing is writing round to trade unions and to political parties to try and get invited to speak, which I think is good because I've got a really good response. Unfortunately, the last 2 or 3 years with what pre-Brexit, Brexit, post-Brexit, elections, Jeremy Corbyn getting kicked out, and COVID, you know, it's rained on my parade, so to speak, but I've got lots of things ready to go. And it's been really good. I've got into branches, I've got into something called trades councils, I've got into different political groups, we've got funding from them, we've had them kind of passing resolutions, etc. And they're the people that can put the pressure onto the MPs. But more importantly, I think, they go away and they talk about it. And I think that's its weight in gold. You know, this old saying about the best recommendation, or the best form of advertising is word of mouth. And it's amazing how it goes out. So I've been doing that within the trade unions. But through the trade unions, I actually got into the hospital around the corner from me. One guy from Nupe, I spoke at his branch and was talking later, and then he got active with me in Lancaster. And he was a nurse, but he was teaching. And ironically enough, I used to go into the education department there. I used to work on teacher training programs, and I'd go in to do observations, etc. he got me invited to a lunchtime meeting, which was a general meeting for any members of staff to attend. And it was voluntary. And he said, and unfortunately for yours, we've not been able to secure funding for tea and coffee, and it is lunchtime. So I said, okay, it's all right. I'm thinking, we get 5 people there. I'm like, I'd be dead happy. If I can talk to 2 or 3 people and they take it on, I'd be happy. So I said, don't worry about it. Then he said, Dr. Bukhari, who's head of education, sends his apologies because he's a consultant on such a thing, and him and his team have had to go off on something else. And then this other team have had to go on something, and there's been emergency cover. So I said, right. I'm thinking, well, still have got me 2 or 3. So voluntary, lunchtime, no meal, and apologies from 2 consultants and other people that had to go off on an emergency. 80 people turned up. 80 people, lots of nurses, doctors, etc., turned up. And at the end of it, there was 2 people opposing. One was a nurse and one was an old consultant. And he's been known to deny patients' requests because it wasn't in line with his faith. You know, if it's got DNR, he's been known to ignore it because he thinks he should be saved. So of all that, 2 people opposed it on faith beliefs. The good thing from that was I'm now part of the curriculum for the F1s and F2s. Is that the right word to use?
Yeah.
F1s and F2s. So I go in once a year and speak on the curriculum to the doctors. I've had 2 people speak against it, both on the grounds of faith. Both on the one's faith was based in Judaism, and the other person was based in Islam on that occasion, but nobody else. The big surprise for me was because I've got Alzheimer's, I've volunteered to be involved in dementia research, and the dementia research people, not only have they said, yeah, we'll come on board with the research, they've actually funded videos for me to. I've recorded a video. If you go on the Right to Die Dignity UK YouTube channel, there's one on there, and it was funded by Define Dementia. So the local dementia groups have had me speak at several of their meetings. They've recorded me on one video, they put it out on all their Facebook pages, and I'm sorry, I should know what the WW is, what they call them. I'm sorry. Oh gosh, what's it called when you go online and you click on somebody's page? You know, like the whatever they call these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember right.
It's catchy, Miriam. You do know that, don't you? You didn't get taught that in medical school, did you?
You Google it.
Yeah. It's so it's really heavily broadcast. I went to something called Freshers, which is a neurological support group that had been set up in Lancaster, primarily people with Parkinson's. And I went to that and said, come along for a coffee. They knew about it, but by third party, his mate has Parkinson's and goes to it. Went along there, introduce yourself, Alex. So, all right, is this like an AA meeting or something? You know, and I think it was Alex Pandolfo, formerly from Manchester, now live in Lancaster. And I thought that was the end of it. But Dr. Penny Foles, she was a lead scientist in dementia research at the university. She said, not your name, tell them what you're involved in. And I had to actually do an impromptu speech on assisted dying. I got lots of support from that. And from there, the matron, Diane Smith, she's the matron for dementia for I might get this name wrong, Morecambe Bay Health Trust, you know, that kind of thing. She's the matron for that. And 2 or 3 times a year, she has meetings, sometimes for nursing staff. But she has one, so I go to several of them when she's got new, people coming into it. I speak at them meetings, and she has volunteers, support and volunteer group once a year. That's like 100 people at it, and she invites me to speak about that on assisted dying. And I think they're very important places to be speaking. Through the Trade Council in Blackburn, the woman who's the secretary of that is a shop steward for Unison, and she's trying to get the same agreement in Blackburn Hospital as what we got in Lancaster. I think it's a real important audience to be talking to. The last thing I attended, and there should have been more than that, it was at Edinburgh University. A former colleague I used to work with at the university in Preston. She's now teaching on nursing and social work degree at Edinburgh. And she contacted me and asked me if I'd go and speak. It took like 12 months, I think, to get the courage to ask the senior management if we could do it. And eventually I went up, she said, can you do 2 slots? I'll give you, she said, is 3 hours enough for a slot? I thought, you start believing again. I said, fine. Well, can you do 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon? I invited Amanda, who's the CEO from Fate, to come and speak with us. I said, I just hope we get the numbers. So they did it on, there's an app, and I can't remember what the app's called, I'm afraid, where, you know, if you've got a meeting, I use it myself, you know, so you just press the button and you say you're going, and then it cuts it off. And there was the maximum they could have in the hall was, I think it was 65. There was 65 in the morning, 65 in the afternoon, and 70 people were turned down. Now that's just undergrads. That's just undergraduates. And I set it up very activity based, and I give them, you know, they had to ask. So I gave them some questions that they had to do around the table. It was all loaded around do no harm, what does it mean, etc. And then around their values and principles and their ethical code of practice. So I set all these questions up, which one might incorrectly assume contrary to assisted dying, but I thought we'd get that chance to turn it, it'd be good. And I also got them to complete a questionnaire before it. Now before it, everybody voted in favour, bar 10 who were unsure, because that was your options, 4 against, unsure. So there was 10 vote, everybody voted in favour, 10 unsure and 5 against. And at the end, I took the ballot again. And that was all the unsures voted for. And out of the 4 or 5 that voted against, there was only 1 person. And she came up to me at the end of it and said, it's only my faith that's forbidding me to support you. So I think that shows the potential that we've got in you know, like, I know you're campaigning with your politicians. I know you've got 2 cracking universities. I've worked with people from Cardiff University. That's the other thing that I find useful. And if you know anybody yourselves, I've worked with students on media courses, law courses, and philosophy. And they come along and they talk to us. But the thing I always say to them, right, I'll do that. I'll do whatever you need me to do. We'll get along and do it, providing A, anything that's filmed or written, you give to me to publish once it's been cleared by your academic supervisors. And B, I used to be president of the NUS when I was down at Oxford. I said, tell them as a former NUS, not only member, but president of union is in this position and wants to come and talk to you. And I also do that with the UCU, the union, you know, the college, the university, whatever we call it now. I keep that going. So I do it on that place. So I work with the students. That's more young people hearing about it, broadcasting it on their media. I'm sure you've seen it, Miriam, on Facebook every now and then. I put these programs up. And it's another way of getting into university and talking to people that are going to have the voice. The only thing I've changed is I used to have a motion asking for the law to be changed. I think it's important that, because it's something that MDMD and Friends at the End are doing. So all of us are doing it in collaboration, bar dignity in dying. And I've changed the resolution now. So what I'm going round is talking to people, arguing the cause, why we should have the law changed. But at the end of it, when I'm asking them to do something concrete other than join MDMD or Fate, depends where I'm talking, come onto our Facebook page, I ask them to put motions to their branch and through their union structures, calling for an evidence-based public inquiry into assisted dying based on the model in Canada. Done. Questions, ma'am? Sorry if I've waffled on.
Can I ask a question? It's maybe quite personal, actually. It's about having the green light, which you said sort of changed your life, turned your life around, and you could sort of carry on living.
Yes. Do
you have a certain level of pressure on your shoulders that you've got to get in there early enough in case you should lose capacity? Do you not fear that now?
I I'm so arrogant. I don't fear anything, to be honest with you. I think I don't fear death. I have a concern. About getting it wrong. Just like I said earlier on. I mean, theoretically, I could take off in Manchester Airport and land in Bath and have lost capacity. Or I mean, that is theoretically unlikely. But sorry, not unlikely, but theoretically possible. And it'd be sent back. So yes, it is a real concern. And it's something else I actually use. I've had to accept that I am going to die before I need to die. Now, unlike if I had cancer, I think I could judge it a lot better by what's deteriorating, how well are the meds doing, am I getting more pain now than relief from the medication. And I think you can get nearer to death with a lot of conditions, but not neurological ones, you know, be it any form of dementia, be it Parkinson's, and I'm seeing others. That's a difficulty. So rather than worry about it or accept it as a pressure, I've accepted it as a given. So therefore, this is what we've got to do. And it's like I say, I've got a general idea of what will be the minimum for me. Now, and like I say, it's unlikely that it's going to come overnight like that. If it does, well, let's say I've got other plans. But it probably won't. So what I've done is there was a huge deterioration taking place prior to the diagnosis. And there was a steady, which is quite common, isn't it, for Alzheimer's? It's like that slide going down rather than incrementally get with vascular. I was aware that that was dropping. And then it seemed to level out. So for the last 2 years, I don't think, or I don't feel, and I've got friends, I would never ask a friend to tell me when it's time to go, because that'd be wrong. That'd be totally wrong. So what I've done is, okay, I can't read. I struggle with writing. You know, when I send you messages, they probably sometimes don't make sense, which I understand. I write things still. I wrote what we stand for, pamphlet, for the right to die within the UK. Sent it off to my friend. He said, I've proofread it. I've made so many changes. And even with one next to the other, I couldn't see the differences. So I'm aware of where my limitations are. I was going to say weaknesses, but I'm going to say limitations are. And they're quite good at the moment. I've not lost any more language than what I lost in the first 12 months or so. The writing, the spelling now, this last 2 weeks, has deteriorated slightly. I don't know what that's about, but I can keep an eye on that. Well, let me give you an example. I went to get showered the other day, so everything's fine. Put that water on, shower, get in the shower. And when I got in the shower, I knew that I wanted to shower, but I couldn't figure out what to do.
Gosh, okay.
You know, so it's like, I mean, we all have our bits where we start, don't we? And then you work your way around, I suppose, in the shower. But I was literally just stood there thinking, right, I'm not quite sure. Now, that's happened once. It might happen in another 2 or 3 months. It happens if it does. That's just not a problem. But when that happens, like, say, monthly or even 6 weekly, then I have to start reconsidering. I constantly, again, what people don't understand is that it's about cognition, it's about perception. I constantly see things that aren't there. But do you know what? I used to pay a packet to do that when I was a kid. So it's not bad. I get it for free these days. It's great. But, you know, once that's why I stopped driving. I didn't have my license taken off me. I started saying things that I knew weren't right. So I thought, okay. In fact, I got to Oban in Scotland in my car. I got out of it. Going to make the drive into the keys. So next time, him and his wife Claire, so next time you're coming down to Lancaster, bring my car back because I ain't driving it again. You know, so that was again not bothered about it. If I had died in it, it wouldn't have been an issue for me. But the thoughts of hurting others is totally different. So yes, I think so. When that shower becomes more of an issue, when I stand at the stove more regularly and I can't figure out why I'm here, when I sometimes I can't distinguish between, you know, like butter beans, chickpeas and things like that. I can't always decide which is which. But when that increases, I think that's the time then that I will go. That could be, it could be a week too early. It could be 10 years too early. That's
no, are you?
I'll never know. No, and that's the crime. And if I could have that, it'd be totally different.
It's all about choice and what your quality of life is right for you, which may not be the same for me or for anybody else.
It might still be at a fairly acceptable level, but I wouldn't chance it. Going further on. And I think that's another thing that I applaud the Swiss for letting us go to Switzerland, but I damn politician after politician for making me go there.
Yeah. And I think that's perhaps talking about the money to get there is something that in Wales, our people, we've got some of their levels of deprivation, just not financially, but from a health point of view, and filling in a form.
Yeah.
It's just beyond quite a lot of the people that we serve, isn't it, really? So it's sort of double discrimination, isn't it, on so many accounts?
There's a woman that I talk to on a regular, because what we have on the Facebook page and what goes on underneath, this stuff goes on there I don't know about, because people are connecting to each other and supporting one another. And I've been with a woman in Scotland who's got the money, got the ability to write out the form, get the form filled out, but she hasn't got the physical ability to get to Scotland, to Switzerland. So there's all kinds of things that people are deprived of it off because of. But I just blame the politicians. And that's, as sad as it might sound, is going to be my last words. Listen to Tom Petty's song singing "I Won't Back Down" because I won't, and I'll be damning the politicians who have forced me over there. Not that it'll bother them, will it?
Has anyone?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Right, Alex, it's Anne here. When you've been talking to people in the various presentations that you've given,
yeah,
and you've had very few people against the idea of assisted dying,
yeah,
have you come across anybody who said they have no faith but are nevertheless against the idea of assisted dying?
The only person I've come across is an old friend of mine, and I campaigned with him back in Manchester in the early 1970s. He was standing for council, and he was of the left. We had something called a dirty dozen in Manchester. That meant they didn't want to see cuts. And he was a leader of it. His name's Graham Stringer.
I've heard of him.
He's an MP now.
He's an MP, yes.
I wrote to him a couple of months, well, maybe about 12 months ago back, and I said, I don't know if you remember me, Graham, and he said, I'm going to forget you. And I outlined what the campaign was, and he said, I'm glad to see that you're using the skills that we developed when we was younger, that kind of thing. He said, and yes, I did vote against it, you're quite right. And his biggest fear was, again, the safeguarding issue. He said, I think there's unscrupulous people that will use it to get rid of elderly relatives. And that's why I think we need a big campaign around safeguarding. I've discussed this with, like I say, at the meetings with MD and Fate, etc.
Fate are very good. Amanda's very good at opening up those discussions, so kind of going head in to the people's concerns and the safeguarding issues. Yeah.
And I think there's people that would agree with it. I'm sure that Graham would do. I wrote to Dennis Skinner. I've been involved in campaigns with him, and during the miners' dispute, he's no longer an MP, and he was fundamentally opposed to it. But I mean, he was basic, but then again, Dennis has been lovely, but always was quite basic. And he said, "Oh, stories a habit to see us all off, lad." So that was my reply to my email off Dennis. But I think Graham, I mean, Dennis Skinner's always got a job in his late 80s, hasn't he? It's probably about my age, and I think if we, that's what I've said to him. I'm not going to keep mithering yet, but I will be coming back another day, and I want to have this fuller discussion about safeguards. Now, this was before Canada, because I think the thing about Canada as well is, unlike Switzerland, where assisted dying has more or less evolved, and it's more of that Swiss way, isn't it? It's more of a things evolve rather than having laws, and it just goes without saying type of thing. In Canada, it's really modern legislation that's gone through a parliament that's not, and a court system that's not too dissimilar to ours. So I think it's more about, and I've asked for MD. They've done we've had the last 3 seminars, haven't we, on what we are, Zoom. And we've had the woman from Canada spoken twice, and then we had the guy who spoke last week, the doctor, and I said,
Henry Marsh was
the next one. Yeah. I think the next one that we really do need to have on it is something about safeguarding, and not just a lecture on it, but practical working shop. Give examples. What happens if I'm given this question? I sometimes try to play devil's advocate on the Right to Die with Dignity UK and throw opposition up and say, well, how would you answer this? You know, 'cause I think that's the only way to learn is to try and respond, isn't it?
I think Charles has got a question if we've got.
I'm very, very interested in this distinction, this outrageous non-distinction that your psychiatrist fellow didn't make between suicide and a desire for assisted death. I mean, that really is, as you said rightly, a total abuse of power. I'm just wondering, how long did he, I mean, on what grounds did he make the totally erroneous diagnosis of depression? I mean, what was his evidence for that?
Dark thoughts. In his mind, I talked about committing suicide.
Have you ever had the chance to rediscuss it, so 5 years hence, to meet that same psychiatrist and discuss this?
I can go and visit the psychiatrist. I think it's once a year. I think it was twice a year, but I can go once a year now to see him. And my GP said, have you touched base with the psychiatrist? And I said, no, not at all, really. And I said, well, what's the reason? Why won't you go and see him? I said, two things. A, can he cure me? No. Secondly, what's the waiting list like for people that he might be able to assist? And that's how long's a piece of string, isn't it, with the NHS? So I've never gone back for those two reasons. One is, what is the point? And I think his time can be spent much more productive with somebody that he can help. If I thought for 1 minute it was the type of guy who I could have changed his mind, I might have encroached on 15 minutes worth of his time to have the argument.
But I'm presuming he basically didn't even know you very well.
He'd obviously read my file, and my doctor writes wonderful things about me for some reason. Even when I was poorly with pneumonia and the flu for 6 weeks there, and they ended up sending care workers in. And she said, oh, you used to be a very clever man, didn't you? I believe you used to be a very intelligent man. So I said, well, contrary to what Dr. Moon may have told you, I said, I've never been intelligent in my life, but I've been quite a good academic, because there is a distinction. But he must have written to him, because when I got the results from the memory assessment, so we had all the memory assessments, and he said that was somebody with your background and ability, we would have expected to score far higher than the average, and you're well below the average. So he had that much information about me. It was just a bias.
Yeah.
That's probably his almost belief, isn't it? That you have to be mentally unwell to want to commit suicide.
Suicide, yeah.
People, it's like a pub discussion, isn't it? Because some people can't accept that you may actually be mentally well, but still want to end your own life.
And I always try to, I mean, it is in the law, it's suicide. I didn't say full stop, it's suicide. But I always, when people use the word assisted suicide, I always check them and say, look, I think there's a very important distinction to be made. A suicide is something that takes, in my opinion, takes place in general when we, as a country or a culture, have failed to either support them or identify the needs. It's something that is done in secret, and it's something that is generally an horrific death done, by themselves. An assisted death isn't suicide, because as soon as I was given that diagnosis in 2015, I always say, it's quite dramatic, I say, it might as well have been an old judge putting a black cap on, because he delivered a death sentence to me. So in essence, because of my condition, I'm already dying. And what I'm saying is, I know what that death will bring. I know the kind of suffering that death may bring with me, and I don't want to do that. So all I'm asking somebody to do is assist a death and stop it taken away in a horrendous way, and help me take that life in a way that's acceptable to me and painless. And it's just, I know legally, because I used to teach law, so it's suicide no matter how you want to wrap it up. But I think it's important to make that very clear distinction between the two. And he clearly hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So everybody that's gone to Switzerland, I mean, I don't know if you saw I did an interview on is it called Good Morning Britain with Philip Schofield and somebody else. And a woman has written to him from one of the Catholic papers saying that anybody that is considering assisted dying has clearly got psychological issues and they're already in a state of depression. Because Nick Ferrari, ironically enough, answered that question, but I broke all my links with him now because of some racist comments that he made. So if you have seen that he's coming to Switzerland with me on the television, he ain't no longer.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, if I can just briefly follow up that one, I'm interested because I mean quite a few of us have left dignity in dying for exactly the reason that you did. I mean, their intransigence in not changing their mind, particularly now when things have changed with the pandemic and so on and so forth. Presumably, you came up against a total brick wall on the 6-month issue, which is, in my view, a fraudulent claim anyway, that anybody can tell that a person's got 6 months or less than 6 months to live. I mean, have you got anything you'd like to say about that 6-month criterion and DID's position, which is, again, totally outrageous?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things about that. I've already outlined what I went through with my dad, and I've seen other people suffering. My mum they thought she was having heart attacks. This is going back years. And I kept saying to the GP, there's something wrong. So I'm not sure if it's dementia, but I was just noticing something in the speech patterns and a sight. I'm not medically trained by any stretch of the imagination. And he just dismissed it, and he asked who the Prime Minister was and what day it is, and it was fine. And it transpires that she was having literally thousands of petty mals every day. So what I was noticing, it's just like, they'd be talking to her, and all of a sudden she stopped talking, and she said, I'm just going to have a little sleep now. Or other times she just like blink and carry on talking. Then the other one was, she'd be talking and she'd say, well, Alex, what I want you to do rather is then go down, so a language would break. Actually, she was having thousands of these. She's ended up with really bad brain damage. I mean, look at a scan of, if you see a scan of my head, there's just little clouding where the dementia's affected it. But my mum, her brain looks as though someone's got, a little needle in Indian ink and gone all the way around with it. And this is 5 years ago. Also attached to that, her heart was functioning at 30% capacity, and she's got horrendously high blood pressure. So whether in hospital, and they said, there's nothing else we can do. Do you want us to put her in palliative care? No, we don't. We'll take her home. How long she got to live? And they said weeks, a month at the most. That was 4.5 years ago. And my mum's still alive, unfortunately. I mean, she doesn't want to be, but that's the 6-month rule. So I think, how certain can we be of 6 months? And I think saying that, even as someone who supports assisted dying, I can see a weakness in the 6-month rule. If I can see it, the oppositionists can. The other thing that it negates, and this is what I've argued with dignity in dying, especially David Pearce, who just lies. He just lies on the Facebook. He's on the Right to Die with Dignity UK Facebook page, and people keep saying to me, why don't you take him off it? And I said, you must be joking. He's the best resource we've got. Because he just keeps giving us gifts. Like, I feel like the little kid at the fair, the coconut shy. You set him up and I'll knock him over. And I've had these arguments with him. I understand that people have horrendous illnesses and they have horrendous deaths. More people have a peaceful death than those who have a horrendous death. And that's the point I always make when I'm talking, to young nurses or young social workers. I'm going to give you some graphic examples of horrendous deaths, but not all deaths are like this. So there's good deaths and there's bad deaths. And what they talk about is suffering, and I agree with that. Nobody should have to suffer for another week or two, a day or two, or a month or two. It shouldn't take place. But if suffering is the criteria, this is what I've always argued with them, how do you justify somebody not suffering with 6 months to live because it's inhumane, but somebody like me who could have years and years of both physical and psychological, to say nothing of emotional, suffering going ahead? And they just won't answer it. They just refuse to answer it. I mean, I've had all kinds of, like Maria said at the beginning, if I see some dignity dying on there, it's an opportunity. I get it and I say something, and it's amazing just how many people, well, I put something on the Facebook page just before, lockdown. Oh gosh, Miriam had a good old go at lockdown, which she got loads of support for, about them writing to doctors during that really bad time of, you know, everybody was working, etc. And they was still trying to raise money. And I'd had a few debates with them. Everybody on the Facebook, a lot of people on the Facebook page commented. But I also put on about the Canadian model. I said, okay, David, you know, I put, this is the Canadian model. This is what's happened. This is how it takes place. Yet Dignity in Dying won't support this, David Pearce. And he come back on and he said, I would never, ever support a form of assisted dying where it involves murder. And he was classing physician-assisted dying as murder. If that's a full-time worker for Dignity in Dying, one of their senior managers, then there's no hope. No hope at all. You know what? You call me cynical. I just think it's a living. I've been to the training days, and if you raise a question with any of the staff that are there, if it's not on script, they can't answer it. You just can't answer it.
My problem is as well, is that if you make someone have a diagnosis of less than 6 months, it leaves power with doctors again. So basically all you need to do is you need to find a doctor who will say what you want them to say. Yeah. And that's not right either, is it?
Well, again, it's fine if you can afford to go and get one.
But you'd know, you know, there would be people that would be known to go and speak to, and they'll say, oh, your dementia's terrible.
Yeah.
You only got days left. And another one would say, well, we don't know, you could be here for 20 years. So it puts the power away from the individual again, doesn't it? So
just go back to that 6-month one, the training event that I referred to earlier on in Birmingham that some people from Wales was at. It was roundabout then that the Canadian mod had come in, and that was 12 months. A death is reasonably foreseeable. Yeah. Now, and I said to him, well, your sister organisation in Canada is supporting this. How do you feel about it? And you know what the response was? It's a bit of an embarrassment. I attended a meeting in Manchester. Fortunately, there was somebody coming with me and was going to 2 separate peoples that they'd organised. And we had 7:30 as the start time. The meeting was well underway when we got there. Everybody else had 6:45.
See, I just think it's important in the campaigning that it's an open discussion, and it just feels that because Dignity is such a powerful brand, that it's almost like it's a cut and paste model, but the discussion needs to be had openly and honestly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can't have a law that by itself is if it's a human right to have say over your own mortality, it's a human right, not just for some humans.
Yeah. It should be there. It should be open. I've challenged them on all aspects of that. And I'm sorry, I never thought, but it's gone. But no, I'm sorry. It was something we were saying about it. So it was the 6-month thing. No, I'm sorry. You have to forgive me for that.
I know, and I spoke to Trevor. Trevor's surname's Moore, isn't he?
Yeah, Trevor Moore, Chair. Yeah. That's Trevor. I do a lot of work with Trevor. Yeah.
Trying to meet with Sarah Wootton, because there's lots of people. We should really be working together. We all think people should have access to assisted dying if they choose.
Sarah won't meet with us.
She won't meet with him.
She won't meet with us at all.
So my next comment is, well, if they won't meet, we need to be very clear about the differences in the different campaigning groups. Otherwise, people think it's just like children in the playground and they can't see the clarity of difference.
The fallback position that they come back on, and it's not easy to dismiss, is we'll have any form of answer, that the answer has been, or what they say to the supporters, if I say something, they go away and ask Dignity in Dying about why the 6-month rule, and they say that it's the only one that politicians will go for. And I always say it's the only one that politicians are hearing, because the leader, the chair of the committee in the Houses of Parliament, the only way to contact him is via a Dignity in Dying email address that he doesn't get.
I think it's one, I keep butting in, and I'm sorry, Alison, I think she's probably still there, who deals with the oncology team in Cardiff, interestingly has turned that argument completely on its head. So most of the people I think you've dealt with, Alison, have been very against assisted dying. But the one thing that they kind of said, actually, I can help with people that are in their final days of cancer. There's the dual effect. We can probably sort out pain. You have a bit more morphine. It may end your life early. The thing, I think, it was Mark Talbot, wasn't it? Who was,
it was.
one thing that he was a bit more like, well, the people that actually maybe are the people with the neurodegenerate conditions, the people who probably have more than months or years to live but are suffering.
Yeah.
Maybe they are the people that should have access to assisted dying. So actually it's completely back to front to the argument that Dignity are giving.
Yeah. He said they were the one kind of people who made him wobble. And interestingly, he said he's an atheist, but still opposed because of the safeguarding. I think you're absolutely right, Alex, that safeguarding is essential.
So I think,
however, I have to say, every doctor I see from now on, I'm going to say, I'm really working on assisted dying, just out of interest to see if they tell me I'm depressed.
And what was the drug of your choice then you need to...
Yes, yeah.
I think it's very important that we do get out to as many people as possible that Dignity in Dying aren't the only organisation. Because I used to support them because I wasn't aware of any other organisation that was fighting for any form of assisted dying. And then 2 or 3 years ago now at the Humanists UK annual convention, we were addressed by a gentleman called Paul Lamb that you may be familiar with. He's one that had the court case last year.
Yeah, and he took the road from me, Paul,
Yeah, he gave such a very entertaining, impassioned, but very moving presentation. And then at the last year's Humanist Celebrants Conference, Trevor addressed us because he himself's a Humanist Celebrant. And that's when I became aware of My Death, My Decision, and realised that Dignity in Dying don't have it right.
I spoke at a public meeting in Plymouth, and when I'm doing anything like that, I mean, I'm great with the press. Just get the press involved. I've got some great national reporters that are really supportive. I've got one at the Daily Mirror that's waiting to do an article on the differences between what we stand for in terms of MDMD, fate, etc., and Dignity in Dying. So that should be interesting when that comes out. But when I was speaking at a meeting at Plymouth, I always write to the universities, trade unions, and the humanist groups. And a guy from the humanist group came along. It was really good at the end of it. He said to me, "I'm going to be honest, up until attending this meeting today, I was in favour with the Oregon model and not the humanist model. But having heard the arguments and the explanation for it, then it just doesn't make sense to have the restrictions." And I think it's because people don't think of people with dementia or with Parkinson's or there's thousands and thousands of other conditions. It's like the mental health, that's the one that normally gets thrown at you. Well, what are people with mental health issues? And I've always, when I get asked that at hospitals, I always say, do you know something? I don't like talking about what kind of illness would qualify, because I don't think we should be having that discussion, especially around mental health, because it's an umbrella term for so many different aspects of conditions. And I would say what I believe in is that and I just give that basic position that anybody over the age of 18 who has an incurable illness or condition that has a permanent and lasting impact on their quality of life should qualify for one. And I just can't sell My Dignity in Dying won't pick that up.
I mean, it might sound very callous and heartless in a way, but I sometimes think that people who have been diagnosed with less than 6 months to live, they're going to die in 6 months anyway. Yeah. They're not the ones that need to be able to make the decision as to when they want to end their own life.
Yeah,
and we have my mum on this system where once the blood pressure drops to something, she's been on, is it they call it end of life care in terms of the IV drip goes in and the medication slots up, and every now and then she falls into that and she's given it. So if it was right and she had 6 months, I mean, that's the double jeopardy he was talking about before as well, isn't it? It's you know, keep putting this medication and we know it's going to kill them. And I wish that my mum was in a permanent state, if not dead, as callous as that might sound. I wish she was, you know, the other option would be a permanent state of sedation. Much better than what she's doing, screaming and screaming all the time. It's just, yeah, it's just callous. That is callous, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting.
Very, thank you.
Well, thank you all for doing what you're doing and organising in Wales. It's amazing.
Well, that's what we need to try and work on, isn't it? How we can show how important we are as a country, really, and our people.
If you ever call in meetings down there and you want a bleeding heart case down there, I'll be down on
I have to say, although everyone's always said that, it's not until you hear you speak from a personal standpoint that it really becomes, it's like, oh God, yes, it does. It is much more powerful, isn't it, than all of us saying, yes, it's really important.
It's also important because you don't think of people with dementia as being as articulate as you are. And that's what's really powerful, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just don't ask me to write anything.
No, speaking is better.
To be honest, isn't it?
Gosh, if I was to submit something to myself, I'd be sending them straight down to the support team for diagnosis of dyslexia, dyspraxia, and everything else. I think it's dreadful. Trouble is, I can't see the mistakes. Actually, I'm convinced everybody's wrong bar me.
That's always a good standpoint.
I think that's excellent. But I forgive them.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks ever so much. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And like I say, you know, you've got my details. If anybody wants to contact me privately, I think you've got my mobile number as well.
I have, yeah. I've got all the
email
details.
address.
There's not many of you. If you do back to Google again, you search, it brings up YouTube and Facebook.
Message, WhatsApp. Yeah, feel free to contact me individually. If you've got any, you know, if you've got anybody that's swaying, we can, you know, the good thing about nowadays is if you've got one person that's swaying, you can always set up a Skype or a WhatsApp and, you know, we can be in the house talking. So, you know, individually, if I can offer any support, I will do. And collectively,
we need to cut and paste you and get a Welsh version to come in to see our training doctors and healthcare professionals and nurses, don't we? That's kind of what would be really powerful.
And I adapt it for where I'm working and what I'm doing. I mean, the one that I do most commonly is the one that starts off, do no harm. What does this really mean? But I've spoken at pensioners groups, never mentioned them. I do an interactive one with them and, you know, kind of ask them questions and then work round to assisted dying. It's anything I can do to help, just give us a shout. Or if you've got any ideas, if I've not done it, I'm sure I'll try to remember what I'm doing.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll all be in touch.
Yeah, well, please do keep in touch. Take care.
Thanks.